Hey guys, Papa Pete back with another Atari VCS review. Today's review is 20th Century Fox game MASH from 1983. You might notice I'm wearing my Kindness Matters shirt today. If you're not familiar with what Kindness Matters is, it is an anti-bullying campaign, a great campaign, and if you would like more information on this campaign, please check into the Worst Pickup Video episode 78 on the Rebel Gaming Club's channel, and Yes Ayasha will explain to you what it's all about. In the meantime, sit back, let's take a look at MASH.
Papa Pete, the old ass gamer. Papa Pete, the old ass gamer. If you haven't grown up by the age of 50, you don't have to.
20th Century Fox is one of the largest and most historic movie studios in the United States when it jumped into the video game business back in 1983. It's no surprise that when they started to make games, they used some of their own licensed properties. Megaforce, Porky's, Alien, and Flash Gordon are just some of the titles and some of the licenses that they created video games for the Atari VCS. Now in the 70s and early 80s, one of the most popular and critically acclaimed television shows was MASH, another 20th Century Fox property. When the show aired its final episode on February 28, 1983, it was an international event, and it became the most watched episodic television show in history, a record that it still holds to this day, with the only thing that's ever having beaten it on US television being a Super Bowl, and even that didn't happen until 2010. Now, not wanting to miss out on the MASH phenomenon, 20th Century Fox released MASH for the Atari VCS later on in 1983. Now, the video game MASH was released with some really interesting promotions. At the time, you could buy a version that was bundled with a t-shirt, a MASH 4077 t-shirt. And it's kind of funny, but when you think about how difficult it would be for the sizing, every t-shirt that was with the game was a medium. I guess they figured that was the most common size at that time. Anyway, it also included a coupon where you could mail in your shirt and exchange it for whatever size you wanted. Didn't want to exchange it? Well, you could also order more t-shirts if you wanted. 20th Century Fox even got Maxwell Klinger himself, Jamie Farr, to do a coast-to-coast tour promoting the game. There were lots of different promotions at different stores, and I can tell you this, I would love to have one of the box copies of this game that Jamie Farr signed at one of these promotional events. Now, in the final very interesting promotion, every copy of the game included a little advertisement for a contest where 20th Century Fox offered $25,000 to whoever could come up with the best game concept that 20th Century Fox could use to create their next MASH game. Now, with the video game crash happening later on that year in 1983, no one really knows if the prize was ever given out or not. There certainly wasn't another game. My guess is it never was given out. MASH is credited to creator Dallas North, as can be seen on the last page of the manual where he gives tips on playing the game. Now, Dallas North's true identity is somewhat of a mystery, and a lot of people believe that it's actually Doug Neubauer. Doug Neubauer worked for Atari in the years gone by, and he was the creator of games such as Star Raiders, as well as its sequel, Solaris. In MASH, the player takes on the role of Chief Surgeon Hawkeye Pierce, and he has to pilot his chopper around the war zone, picking up wounded, catching paratrooping medics, and taking them all back to the hospital where he'll perform surgery to try to save their lives. Hold it, what? Hawkeye Pierce wasn't a pilot, he was a surgeon. In the real MASH, he never would have flown the chopper. Oh well, I guess we'll just have to take it for what it is. But at the end of the day, the object is to score more points than your arch rival, full ferret-faced Frank Burns, and reach 999 points before he does. In MASH, you have to fly around the playfield picking up wounded. Now, you also have to avoid the trees, and try to avoid the fire from the North Korean tank that's shooting at you from the bottom. Each wave of 6 wounded appear and then replenishes randomly after the last one is picked up. Now, the whole time, you're trying to battle Frank Burns and pick up the wounded as fast as possible. That being said, your chopper can only carry 5 wounded at a time, so you have to return them to the hospital and then keep going back to pick up more wounded. After a combination of 30 wounded are picked up by yourself and Frank Burns, the scene switches to the operating room. Now in the operating room, it's very much like the board game Operation. You have an extractor and you have to extract as many pieces of shrapnel as you can in 15 seconds. The more pieces of shrapnel that you can successfully extract, the more points you get. As a hint, you can use any part of the extractor to remove the shrapnel, so move carefully but move as quickly as possible. Now, if time runs out, or if you touch any of the sidewalls, the operating room scene ends and you go back to the chopper scene. That being said, you keep going back and forth, scoring as many points as possible until either you or old Ferret Face get to 999. There are also 3 other variations of games on the cartridge. Now, the main game that I've been describing is called Welcome to Korea. The next game is called Colonel Potter, and in this game, instead of picking up wounded off the field, you catch paratrooping medics in your plane, and after you catch 40, you switch to the operating scene. The operating room is identical to the Welcome to Korea game. The third variation is called Ceasefire, and it's identical to the Welcome to Korea game except for 2 major factors. First of all, the helicopter is quite a bit smaller, and the second thing, the tank at the bottom, the North Korean tank, doesn't fire at you. So it's a little bit easier, but it's also a little bit quicker game. The final game variation on the cartridge is simply the operating room scene, but the scoring works a little bit differently. You still score your points the same way by extracting shrapnel out of the patient, but Frank Burns scores his points 6 points for every second it takes you as the game goes on. The first one to get to 999 points wins. So, in total, there are 4 different variations on the MASH cartridge. There is Welcome to Korea, which I call the main game. There's Colonel Potter with the paratrooping medics. There's Ceasefire, which is like the first game, except for with a little bit smaller helicopters and nothing firing at you. And finally, there's OR, which is just the operating room scene. Now, each of these games you can play against a computer, which is Frank Burns, but there's also a second version of each where you can have a second player to play head-to-head. In Welcome to Korea and in Ceasefire, each wounded soldier is starts being worth 5 points, and then that increases by 2 points each time you take any number of wounded soldiers back to the hospital. The current value of each wounded soldier that you pick up is shown beside your score at the top of the screen. In the game Colonel Potter, each paratrooping medic is worth between 5 and 20 points. Now, the higher on the screen they are, the less points they're worth. So if you catch them at the bottom of the screen, that's the most. Those ones are worth 20, as opposed to one you catch just as they come out of the plane, which are only worth 5. In the operating stage of each game, the point value for extracting the shrapnel is shown beside your score at the top of the screen. Now, if you do hit the sidewall, Frank Burns doesn't score any points unless you have the difficulty switches set on level A. If you had the difficulty switches on A, not only does Frank Burns get the points that you would have gotten had you successfully extracted the piece of shrapnel, but he also gets a point for each second that was left on the clock when you ended that round. In the OR game, like I said before, you get the points for each piece of shrapnel that you extract according to the difficulty of that particular piece. And Frank Burns simply gets 6 points per second. Now, if you put the difficulty switches into the A position, not only will Frank Burns get 6 points per second, he'll also get the value of the piece of shrapnel if you touch the sidewalls by mistake. The graphics in MASH are acceptable. The colors are clear, there's quite a bit of flickering, but in general, the choppers, you can see what they are. They do look like choppers. You can recognize a hospital, the wounded soldiers, the paratrooping medics, which actually are the same sprites, and you can also recognize the enemies shooting at you. The operating room is very basic though. The patient is just one solid pink, and there could have been some more detail put into that screen. Overall, I'd call it acceptable, the graphics for the entire game, but like I said before, there is quite a bit of flickering, but at the end of the day, it's average. The sound clips in MASH are just the typical buzzes, beeps, and flutters that you hear in 100 other Atari 2600 games. There's nothing too much to speak of. There is a tune at the beginning of the game, which isn't the MASH tune. But then again, maybe it's supposed to be the MASH tune. And if it's supposed to be the MASH tune, it's pretty bad. Overall, there's nothing really special or memorable about the sounds or music in MASH, the video game. I'm going to try a game of Welcome to Korea. Let's see how it goes. Okay, so this is Welcome to Korea, game number 1. And away we go. You look, see beside my score? It says 5. That means that each person is worth 5 points. So it's going to go up by 2 every time I drop somebody off the hospital. So right now, I'm not going to worry about getting a lot. Oh, I got shot. And when I get shot, the ambulance comes, drags me off, and I fly back out of the hospital. Oh, I'm going to try to drop them off as often as possible, because that puts my score up quicker. But that doesn't help, but I keep getting shot, so I'm behind by about 30 points now, 35 maybe. For 13 each. 15, whoever's ahead is who he'll try to shoot. So now we're 17, I get shot again. I'm struggling here. There's 30. Okay, here we go. We're going to try to get some points. This one's worth 15. This one's worth 65. This is a good one. This one's tough. Oh, ferret face. Oh, I got hit. Okay, that ends it. As soon as you hit like that, that ends the operating room scene. You can't get any more of those bonus points. I am worth 17 each. These are worth 23. I had to get mine up. The trees stink. Oh, he's being shot and falling. That's good. Because they don't shoot once they start falling. They don't shoot again while somebody's falling. Oh, 23. Okay, I'm almost up to the maximum number of points. So I'm just going to start grabbing men. Because next time I get back, they're all worth 25. Ah, they're all worth 25 now, but I'm shot. I'm still not behind by very much. And I should get the... full. I should get the operating scene, room scene right here. What's this one worth? This one's worth 25. This one's 15. See how I could use that in? Oh, this one should be worth quite a bit. Oh, shoot. Okay, there we go. I'm still ahead by a little bit. I've capped out the points, so I'm all right. Oh, shot. Well, you bounce around those trees, though. That kind of stinks. All right, here we go. Oh, no. It'll drop me right by the hospital. I can drop them off. And there, hey, look at that. Only 2 operating scenes. Close game. 9.99 to 25. Not too bad. It's sort of funny. It shoots you when you get ahead. The tank tries to shoot you and really keeps it even. But that's MASH. Welcome to Korea. Well, guys, you know, I have to be completely honest with you. MASH is my all-time favorite television show. I've seen every episode multiple times. I own the entire series, movie, everything on DVD. I can still remember back February 28th, 1983. I can remember sitting in the den at my parents' house where I grew up, watching the show and how much I loved it. And I've loved it my whole life right up till today. Matter of fact, I've already watched 2 episodes today, and I'm starting my 3rd one right now. So I'm going to be biased, right? And going to love this game. Well, let me give you a hint by telling you this. Hawkeye Pierce does not, and never did, and never will fly a chopper. Now, that being said, the game is acceptable, and it's somewhat representative of MASH and the things that they went through at the time with the operating room and flying the choppers and such. But neither of those things really make it a great game. In fact, I can still remember buying this game back in 1983 and remembering how I was quite disappointed with the way it turned out. That being said, I'm going to give MASH by 20th Century Fox a fair rating. Well, guys, that's it for my review of 20th Century Fox's MASH for the Atari VCS. Love MASH? like the game, but it really could have been so much more. Don't forget to check out Console Purists, one of the best retro gaming Facebook groups on Facebook today. 17,000 people strong. If you want to discuss retro games, whether it be games from the 70s or before, right up to games of today, check out Console Purists. You'll be glad you did. In the meantime, I'm Papa Pete. Thanks for tuning in, and we'll see you next time. And kindness matters.
Papa Pete, the old ass gamer. Papa Pete, the old ass gamer. If you haven't grown up by the age of 50, you don't have to.
You're watching Papa Pete, the old guy gamer.
What the hell?